Hello and welcome to anyone who's watching this video. In this video I'm going to look at different types of block playing, what's available, hints and tips on setting them up and using them and buying them. And they're not in date order, I've put them in numerical order because I had to choose an order of some description. I can't cover every single block plane there is because Stanley alone have over 60 models of block plane. If you add into everybody else's variations, you're well over 100. So what I've tried to do is make a selection of ones with different types of adjusters and some sort of design feature to them. So I'll just apologise briefly. We've got a storm at the moment, Storm Darren. It's giving us an absolute battering. So if you can hear any rumblings in the background or things clattering, that's what it is. And the dog might start barking because it's upsetting him at the moment. So I do apologise for that. So what I'd like to start with is just a couple of things I've noticed is that people say you don't need a block plane. And I used to be one of those I suppose tradesmen who didn't really rate a block plane and didn't really use one. It's only in recent years that I've started to use one and realised how valuable they are and how convenient they are. So up until that point I'd just use a number 4. This one is a Lee Nielsen, but Stanley number 4 was what I used mostly, and I did everything I wanted to do with that. But what I didn't realise at the time, I was missing the point. And I can do a visual representation of that. It's like saying, if you've got one of these, you don't need one of these. And that's what you're looking at. That will do everything you want it to do. You can knock a hole in a wall, you can knock a nail in it, you can knock a job together with it, you could even put a panel pin in with it if you wanted to. But there are better tools for the job. And that visually just sums up what block planes are all about. It's just a lot easier. It's a lot easier to be more accurate. And you've got more control over a block plane. So that's my view on that. There's a lot of things that you don't need, but it's very convenient and makes work and life a lot easier if you have them. So I'm a fan of a block plane now, and I use one every day and wouldn't be without one. So the other thing to address is the standard angle or the low angle. Now this is a low angle Veritas one. And people say there's not a lot of difference in the angles because they bevel up. By the time you take that off, they add it onto the angle and such like. They're not much different than a standard block plane or a smoothing plane, which cuts at about 45 degrees. But if you look at it on paper, it's about 8 degrees. And that doesn't sound a lot, but it makes a very big difference if you work in end grain. And by end grain, I mean actually square on at 90 degrees. Then a low angle comes into its own, and that's what it's best suited to. The same as a jack. A low angle jack plane it's designed for end grain, and that's what it excels at. For the majority of work and jobs and adjusting miters, if you cut a mitre, jobs aren't always square, you have to adjust the mitre slightly off your chop saw or guillotine or whatever you use, then a standard angle block plane is fine for that. Even though you're kind of working end grain, you're working at 45 degrees or at an angle, and the standard angle block plane is fine for that. And for most people, I think a standard angle is the way to go. All the ones I've got here are standard angle ones, because they're easier to get hold of. There's more of them around. The low angle ones are a bit more scarce and a bit more expensive to buy. So if you're working square on end grain, I don't know, if you were making wooden boxes and you're nailing them together and you're cleaning the end grain off, then a low angle's the way to go. Also, if you sometimes using like a plywood or a birch face ply, low angle planes excel on planing the edges of that if you happen to be making something out of that type of material where the grain is end grain and grain the normal way. A low angle excels at that particular job, but for general work and what most people will use, I think a standard angle is the way to go. So we'll start having a look at them, and I've got them all to work perfectly well and produce fine shavings. The only real difference in them is how easy they are to adjust possibly, and there are one or two in here that are questionable, I would say. And it's also where the blades are available for them. If you happen to need a new blade for one, some of the blades are no longer available. So we'll start with a Stanley 110, which is the simplest type of block plane. This, I'll just push these back a minute because it might give a better view of what we're doing. So the Stanley 110 has been around for over 100 years. It's probably the simplest of block planes. I've got it to plane some, well, you can see through that how thin the shaving is. It works perfectly well. There are only 5 components, which is the bed, the knob, the adjusting wheel, the cap and the blade. And it couldn't be simpler really. This one has like a toe cast into it, which is for tapping the back of it to adjust, to draw the blade out. And it's very effective. What I found with these is, once you flatten the bed and you've got the bed flat, what I found is the best thing is to put the blade you've got on the bed and see if it's flat. Is there any twist in it? And does it lie flat on there? If it doesn't and the blade's distorted, I actually I straighten my blades up. This is only really suitable for a standard sort of blade. You can't do it with an A2 or something like that. They're just too hard and too rigid. But the type of blades that go into these planes aren't that hard. You can't do it with a laminated blade either. Sometimes if you look at the back of the blade, you'll see there's a definite line across it, or maybe like a wave, and that means it's a laminated blade. It's a hard piece welded onto a softer piece, and if that's the case, then they won't sharpen, they won't straighten either. But what I've found is, and I've got away with it, I've probably done over 30 blades like this, maybe more, and most of the time I've been okay. If you tap them, if you get them warm, put them on a radiator or something, and just get them warm, not hot, and if you tap them, you can actually straighten them. I've even had some where the corners haven't been contacting. There's like grind, I haven't been able to get the grind marks out the corners, and I've actually done it that way, and I've hit the middle here, and I've actually taken a hollow out of it. And 99% of the time it's been absolutely fine. And if it's twisted, if you find when you put it on there it rocks, I put mine in a vise and put some soft jaws in a vise, and then I just put a spanner on like that, and you can apply some, you can actually take the twist out of them so that you end up with a flat blade. The only issue, I'll show you the only one I've ever broken was this one, and it went straight away. This is a record one, I would have said it was a relatively modern one, and as soon as I tapped it, it just pinged straight off. That is rare, but I've got to show it you just in case. You're going to try this. There is a risk, but that's the only one I've ever broken, and it went really easy. I just tapped it and it was gone. But the only difference with this one was I did it on a piece of metal. I did it on a metal, on like an anvil, and whether the shock off that finished it off, or whether it's just the way this blade was hardened. But most of the time you can chew the blades up. There is another issue you get with these, people over tightening them. This blade won't hold an edge. Funnily enough, this is a record crucible cast, and this won't hold an edge. But you can see there's a dint in there, and that's from over tightening the cap. And I've had some that have been, that's distorted the whole blade, and I haven't been able to do anything with it. I've had to source another blade. This one is okay, it's flat enough, but it's just some of them, there's been that much pressure applied to there, it's made it like a spoon, and then it distorts the whole blade, and then there's not much you can do with it. So once I've sort of found that, and I'm happy with the blades flat and that, I tend to put them in, these very often have paint on them, these ramps here where the blade sits, they very often have paint on them, and I tend to take that paint off with a file. I've got a file here that I've modified slightly. I've ground the end at the top off there for access, and I've taken the teeth off that part so that I can put it in there and use the ramp as a guide and file those posts to be in line with the ramp and get a relatively good surface on them, because many of them, they're just cast and then they've not been cleaned up at all. There's no machining been done. So I found taking the paint off them and cleaning them up makes a difference. And then if you put the blade in and you hold it just with your thumb on the ramp there, you can tap it and see if it's sitting flat. And if it's not, you can take a bit more off one post or the other, until when that blade's in sitting on the ramp, it's actually sitting on, as you can hear, it's sitting on the posts, and that gives you the best stability for the blade. It'll cut better that way. So there's not much to go wrong with these. Once you've got them set up, they're fine. What I tend to do is, it's a bit awkward for me around the camera here, but I tend to just put them in slack so I can still move the blade around. And then I'll pull the blade to roughly, so it's somewhere near being in the right place. Just put a bit more tension on that, give it a wiggle, so that it's somewhere near where you want it. And then I tend to tighten these. They only need tightening enough to stop the cap moving. You don't want to be screwing these down tight. If you tighten them up, you're tightening it too much, you're putting it under too much tension. Literally just enough to stop the cap wobbling around. Then you can still adjust the blade with it like that. So you just tap the blade here, small taps till you get the blade where you want it laterally. That's all you're looking at. And when you get it somewhere near where you want it, you can tighten that just a little bit. It's nothing. It's just not even, it's barely a turn, barely a movement. That's enough. And then if you want to draw it back, just give it, I use a small hammer like this and just crack the end of there. And that will draw the blade back into the plane. And that's just about perfect. It's that easy. You can just check that literally, you can see how my hands are spinning there. That is tight enough. As long as that's not waggling around, that's tight enough, and that will work just fine like that. I've been impressed with this little plane. It's nice. It's got a nice feel to it, a nice weight to it, and it's relatively, you know, it's perfectly adequate as you know, for a block plane. It's perfectly fine, and they still make these today, but I wouldn't go for a new one. These castings on these are much better. The mouth, you know, the mouth's a nice sort of size and shape, and the blade's presenting true. So they're a good, usable, simple plane, and you can pick them up off eBay and places like that for less than 20 quid. So I think they're fine. And then we come on to this is the same plane, well, the same model. It's a 110, but it's a more modern one. It's a 110A, this is. And again, you can get it, you know, you can see through that. You can get paper thin shavings off it. And I do actually like these. This is a 110A. There's not as many of these around. It's got a plastic button on it, but really you're not holding it, you're only putting your finger on it, so that doesn't really trouble me. This was painted orange, but it was in a bad state, and I've stripped it off. These have an aluminium cap on them, so they can be polished. And I do actually like the shape of them. I think they're quite smart, and they feel nice. They have a nice feel to them. I think these are a sort of hidden gem, really, amongst all the others. Some people will dismiss them because they've got a plastic handle on them, but I wouldn't take any notice of that, because they work. And what is interesting about this one has a metal wheel on it. Some of them have a nylon wheel on them. That was the original colour of the cap. And it's interesting that this must be an early one of these. But it's got a metal wheel on it now. I've got another one over there which I'll show you in a minute, just to compare them, that has a nylon wheel on it. But these castings are really well made on these. They're a nicely made plane. The castings aren't thick on them. They're nice. They've got a nice thin. I quite like them with a thin casting on. It's usually a good sign. And they're actually a nice plane. They have been over linished. They've took the corners off a lot on a linish, on a sander. They've been a bit. All the ones I've had, the corners have been well rounded off, which it doesn't really matter. You want them round a little bit. It's just that's a little bit excessive, as you can see. But these posts are machined on these, and they're one of the only ones I've found where the posts have been actually milled, and a nice job as well. Now this has a different sort of blade in it with a shoulder on, but these aren't available. But you can put a standard blade in. I'm just looking now. I'll be able to show you when I go further along. You can put a standard blade in these. It doesn't have to be that type. But I'll be able to show you that when I go further along. There's another one, but that's the only issue, is the blades aren't, you can't get that particular blade. But you can use you could use a blade from another plane in that, which I've got one further along, which I'll show you, and I'll compare the two then. I'm just thinking now that might be an issue actually. because I've got one of these was got an adjuster on it, and it had this blade on it, this one, which wasn't very good. But I'm just thinking now that it probably won't be sufficient. You'd have to, because where that sits on the blade would be in the grooves, so that might be an issue. Let me just have a look at that blade there. Yeah, so that was the blade that came with that, which is a 220A, and they're interchangeable. But it's occurred to me just what I said is incorrect, because you couldn't use one of those blades even though it would go in, because these grooves in there would cause an issue with the tightening down of the screw. So along those lines, I like these, but having said that, the blade isn't available. They don't, at the moment, Stanley don't do a plain blade with no grooves or adjustment in it. So yeah, that's a shame actually, but I do like those. If you can get one with a good blade in it, they're a nice plane. And again, it's just, you're just tapping it. And this doesn't have a toe on it, but you can tap the casting, it's fine. I wouldn't do it on a really frosty day, but I do like that one. And just as a variant of that one is this one's must be slightly newer. Again, you can get a shaving out of it. But this has a nylon wheel on it instead of the metal wheel, which they're both the same plane. And yet this just must be a few months earlier than that one. And the interesting thing is those metal wheels won't interchange with an older one, which you'd think they'd be using old parts up, but no, those threads don't fit in the older 110s. So this is just the same, it's the same casting, but this is in the original colour plastic handle, but this has a plastic adjusting wheel on it. And that's the blade there. As I was saying about the two types of blade, they will interchange, but I'm interested as to, I don't know what this is. There doesn't seem to be any reason for this. These cutouts don't seem to serve any purpose. They must have been off another plane. They must be common with another plane that had yeah, it'd be one of these with that in. So those blades are available. Just wondering if that, yeah, they would work actually, but they're only available at a second market ones. That the Ray Isles is making one in the UK. So you can interchange those blades. So you could put one of those blades in there and it wouldn't affect it. Even though it's got the grooves on the back, they're not going to interfere with the adjuster. So, but the only person I know that's doing those blades at the moment is Ray Isles, and they're not cheap. They're about £22 with delivery. So again, if you can find one with a good blade in it, they're a good plane. If you happen to have a blade lying around that doesn't have any cutouts or markings on here that's going to affect this adjuster, then you can fit that. These nylon adjusters are okay actually, there's nothing wrong with it. It works just fine. And as I said, I do have a soft spot for the A10. It's a nice plane. It's a shame the blades can't be bought, but a lot of things over time get lost. Now this one is a bit of a weird one really. This is a 120, and I had high hopes for this one because it has a paddle adjuster on it. Some call them a beaver tail. And I thought, well, what a great idea. It's a simple plane. You tap the lateral with that. Normally when the lateral's set, you can just pull them in and out, and it works fine. But what I've noticed is it's very difficult to get a very small amount of movement on it. So when you're trying to get a fine cut, it's that lever it's very difficult to move it a very slight amount. You're looking a couple of thou or something. It's very difficult to do that with that lever, but it works fine. It's just not easy to get a fine adjustment on it. I know there's a lot of complaints about this particular model because of the adjuster. This one happens to be a sweetheart model, so it's 100 years old. Because of these very fine teeth in the back of the blade here. These blades aren't available, you have to get a second-hand one. And because of the fine teeth on the adjuster there, where the lever works, a lot of people have found those teeth have stripped off, and obviously that's the end of that basically. But I've found that if you can get the adjuster roughly in the middle, drop him into there, and that's it really. I like the idea, but the actual usability of it is quite poor. It's just really difficult to get that very fine adjustment. And you could tap it, I suppose, with a hammer, but maybe that's what strips those teeth off. So I'd kind of avoid those. I think it's a flawed design really, so I think I'd leave that one. And then we come on to this, of the weirdest of them all, and they call them a double-ended block plane. Well, a block plane one end and a bull nose the other. Oof. I mean, I got it to plane, you know, again, very fine shavings. I got it to work okay, but I just don't see what purpose it is. I think this is one of Stanley's marketing disasters really. I think it was aimed at the DIY market and buy one plane, do two jobs. And as you know, there's an old saying that says jack of all trades and master of none. And this one falls into that category because as a block plane, it's nearer to a small smoother. The size of it and using it, it's almost like it needs a handle on the back. And as a bullnose, it really isn't a bullnose because, just bear with me, I'll just get a bullnose plane to show you. Because here I have a bullnose plane, and the blades, it doesn't have a side on it. The blades come through to the side there, and that's so you can get into a rebate and plane up. If you were chewing rebates up, you can clean the corner out with a chisel and then dress it in with that. Well, when it's got sides on it like that, it's not a bullnose, and you can't use it as well. As for this business of wanting to plane up to something, I mean, how on earth does that work? Because when you plane up to a stop and you've got a shaving curled out of here and you've gone up to something, the only thing you can do is tear it off and you're left with a shave. I do not see any purpose for it. I just see it as a white elephant, frankly. I don't know what they were thinking when they made it. I'm sure it was just some sort of marketing ploy for the DIY market, or buy one plane, get two, but it absolutely doesn't work. It's too big for a block plane and it'll never be a bullnose. So I'd avoid those at all costs. This is a tap one again, where you tap your blade to adjust it. But there is one exception to this if you happen to find one. There's one that has an adjuster on it that you can, and it's a depth adjuster, so that you can basically adjust the depth of the blade, and it's on like a kind of a bar, so it flips over from one side to the other, so you can use it for this side or that side. And if you see one of those, it might be worth buying it if it's cheap, because not because you're going to use it, but because they are rare, and they do make good money. So if you saw one at a car boot sale or somewhere and it was cheap, then it might be worth, you might make a couple of quid on it, but for using them, no use at all. But you can see that I've cleaned these posts up on here. Again, I've just had the file in, and I've just took the paint off those posts and just put somewhere for the blade to sit tight. As I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just too big for a block plane, and it'll never be a bull nose. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a white elephant. So that covers that one. So now we get on to the 220s. Now this is an older one. Again, it can produce fine shavings. It got a little lever cap. Again, this is a sweetheart one, and somebody's actually ground the date into, I don't suppose you can see that, but they've actually engraved the date, their initials and the date on there, 1926, and I think it says the 8th 1926, so it's presumably it was August 1926, and these are okay. It's a nice plane. I mean, you can tell the older American ones because they have the holes in the I'll show you the newer one. The newer one has a solid adjuster on it, like that. And the older one has this kind of perforated adjuster on it. And these are the American ones. There's nothing wrong with it. It's absolutely fine. Again, these blades aren't available. But as I said, the Ray Isle, you can buy a Ray Isles one in the UK that does do that, but you can't buy a Stanley one. So if you're buying one, you need to be aware of that. But it's fine. It's easy to adjust, and once you've got it set up, again, these don't need to be tight. That lever only needs to be enough to stop the cap moving. But you've got your depth adjuster, which works well. You just tap your lateral with a hammer, get it where you want it. Once you've got the lateral right, it'll normally stay there, and you can just wind it in and out and adjust it. So that's the older version of that, but this is a slightly newer version, which this one's made in the UK. It has the thicker, it's the same thing, but it has a thicker wheel on the end, which has got Stanley. This one's got Made in England written on it. Again, you can get super fine shavings out of them. This one I actually really like. I think this is my favourite of all these on the table, because it's well made, it works well, it's easy to use. Once you've got your lateral set, you're away. This is the only plane I've ever had that's got no backlash in the adjuster. Amazingly enough, it's direct, so if you put it in, it goes in, if you pull it out, it goes out, and that adjuster is absolutely bang on. You can actually wind this blade in and out precisely, and that's the only plane, no matter what, jack planes, smoothing planes, anything, it's the only plane I've ever had that's been direct like that one is. And I do like that one. I think that's my favourite of all of them. It's a simple plane, but it adjusts really nicely and it works really well. Again, these blades aren't available So if you buy one, make sure you get a good blade with it. This is the original blade, but just bear that in mind, that you can't buy a blade off the shelf other than a Ray Isles one if you're in the UK. I don't know whether he sells them in America or whether there's anyone in America, third party, that's making those sort of blades. I don't know. So, right, so that's the more modern 220. By the way, the new 220s are nothing, they're nowhere near as refined as that. So I think that's a better deal personally. And then we have this, which is a 220A, again one of the A variants. This this cap on this was shiny black, but they've got a really strange finish on them. It's almost like a plastic coating, and you can't strip it off with a paint stripper or something. It's I ended up burning it off carefully with a blowtorch, not on the aluminium because you'll melt that, but on the actual, this was in a right mess, it was all peeling. So I actually burnt this off with a blowtorch very carefully, and it kind of disintegrates under heat. But this one has a lateral and a depth adjuster on it. And these blades are available freely. These are out of the new. This is a new blade I've put in. Actually, it came with this one. It came with this blade, which you can see it's got 220A written on it. And it's got the grooves in the back. Yet that one will still fit and work perfectly. So I don't know why the blade was made that way, why they were saving metal. It doesn't need it for lateral adjustment. I honestly don't know what the reason is. But again, I have a soft spot for this one. This one has a slightly different type of snap cap on it. It's like a kind of a lever. But there's no hinge here. It's like a hook that goes round a pin. And the only thing that holds it in is that piece of spring steel there. But it's effective. It's a bit aggressive. It's a little bit aggressive, but it is effective. And it's got lateral adjustment and depth adjustment. And again, I do like this. It has a nice feel to it. Again, there's a plastic knob, which is, I don't really mind that because I'm not holding it. I'm just putting my finger on it. But it has a nice feel to it. And I think that's another hidden gem, to be honest. I like that one. And then we get on to your run-of-your-mill Stanley 9.5s, which again, obviously, you know, I mean, it's a common plane. There are a lot of these around. Adjustable mouth with this kind of a wheel and a lever arrangement, which works just fine. This is a Ray Isles blade that I fitted in here. I don't know, yeah, you think you can just about see Ray Isles on there. It's thicker than the standard blade, but it's a replacement for these, which aren't available, and it does work just fine. The thing to be careful about with these is there's little teeth in here. Yeah, you can just see them there. Just make sure they aren't damaged, because that arm going up and down and those teeth are what adjusts your blade. And very often those teeth are missing or damaged. And if the teeth aren't there, then obviously you haven't got adjustment. The only thing I'll say about these is you can get the adjuster that it's in between these teeth. So sometimes you end up having to take 2mm off your blade because one set of teeth's too small and one set of teeth's too long through the plane. So you kind of get to a point where you might have to waste some of your blade to get it into the next one. And roughly the best place to have those is roughly in the middle of the thread when it's in about the right place. The other thing I'm not keen about is how, I mean, I've tightened this slightly and I've tried all sorts of methods to tighten them. because this screw is threaded through this arm and into the casting, and the issue with that is when you put that arm on the bed and screw the screw through and try and catch it into the casting as close as you can, so that's as close to the bed as it can be, it's never truly touching, and these things waddle about all over the place, and I'm not a great lover of that. You can see I've got a bit of string in here because I put a piece of I think it's butcher's string. I put a piece of string around there and just tie it underneath, just pull it under the back here into this bit and tie a knot at the front, and that just puts a bit of tension on the adjuster, because otherwise they're waddling around everywhere. And I think that's what puts me off these particular planes. There's very fine adjustment on them, but I just find this contraption here, just, I don't know, it just seems a bit flimsy to me, and this thing waddling around really annoys me. And although it's probably not moving the blade, I don't like the feel of it when you've got hold of it and your hand's catching this. But there are a lot of these around that are common plane. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's just that really, just this looseness. And as I said, you can't get the blades other than a Ray Isles one. So then we move on to the last one. Now this was the only knuckle cap I was really prepared to buy, to be honest. Again, very fine shavings. Because the Stanley variants of these, most of them are worn out. There's a lot of moving parts on them. This one happens to be a record one, I think from about the 50s. It's newer than the Stanley ones. Adjustable mouth. Again, you've got the teeth on there. And the lever and wheel to adjust it. Again, this thing's waddling around all over the place. And again, you can't get blades for it. This blade that came with it, which is a record crucible cast, which is a good blade, it won't hold an edge. It's just a dud. Normally crucible cast blades are very good, but this one's just a wrong one. So I forked out for a Ray Isles one, and it does work. But all this contraption, I don't know. I've looked at the old Stanley ones and that, and I just don't see the merit in them. I just think they're worn out. If you're a collector and you want a snap cap, then fine, but if you want to use one, I don't think there's any merit in them at all, frankly. And this is a very clean record one. But I paid good money for this. I think I paid about 75 quid for it, and then I've put a £23 Ray Isles blade in it, so it's a lot of money really, I think, for what it is. I've wanted a snap cap one because I wanted to try one, but having tried one, I wouldn't be any rush to buy another one, frankly. And I think the Stanley ones are just past it now. I think they've just worn out. There's too many moving parts on them, and personally I'd leave them alone. They're also quite heavy. That snap cap is heavy. It makes the plane heavy. So to sum up, I don't think you can go far wrong with a really basic old 110 from Stanley. If it's in good order and the blade's good in it, I don't think you can go wrong with that. It's simple, it's effective, it works just as well as any of the others. Adjusting it's easy once you get used to it. As I said, the only issue is you can't buy a blade, so make sure the blade that's in it is appropriate. I'm just thinking now about those blade situation. It's got my head scratching now, because I'm just wondering whether these new Stanley blades from these, whether they will go in. No, they won't, you see, because they've got the notches in the top. So the Ray Isles blade like that would go in. I've no doubt about that, because the cutout's irrelevant, and the notches won't affect the notches aren't affecting the posts. So if you've got a blade that's flat on the top, it will interchange. These are just plain, but you could quite easily use one of those blades, as long as it, like that one, it hasn't got the notches coming through, because that'll interfere with the adjusting cap. But I think those are good. I'd quite happily buy and use one of those, and they're only in the teens of pounds on eBay. My other one that I have a soft spot for is this 220A, which will take a new blade. It's got all the adjusters on it. I don't mind the snap cap. Once you get used to it, don't have it too tight. It's quite aggressive, but I wouldn't have it too tight. But that's nice, and the cap polished up nice on it as well. But I suppose my favourite of all of them is going to be the semi-modern, and it's not modern, but it's newer than the American version. Is this version, the 220, the simple version. I really like this one, but again, you can't get the blades for it, which is another issue. Ray Isles is the option, not cheap, but I really like the way that works, and the fact that that's positive on mine anyway, that it's absolutely bang on in and out, no slack in it at all. That makes it a winner for me. So those would be my choices, I think, as the best buys. Second hand, an old 220, a 220A which will take a new blade, and a kind of in between modern 220 which is very simple and works really well, but you can't get the blade for. So I hope that throws a bit of light on things. It's very, very complicated. As I said, there's over 100 block planes, and I've been 2 months preparing for this video, looking into them, buying some, refurbishing them, getting them to work, looking into where the blades are available. It's been quite a job, to be honest, but it was something I was interested in, and I thought it was something that might help somebody else. So it's a minefield, frankly. There's that many of them. Just another tip on buying old ones. The thing that I'm not over keen on, my thing is I try to buy one that isn't too badly pitted. That's my thing. You see there's a little bit of pitting on the edge. I can live with that, but I don't like to see the soles really badly pitted. But the issue on eBay at the moment is a lot of people, they're doing this to them, and they're running over them with a wire. I'm presuming it's a brass wire wheel, and it's kind of burnishing them, and then they just look shiny black. And the same with the blade, you can't really tell what you've got, and that's a bit of a problem, because you can't tell whether that blade's badly pitted or not really, because it's been burnished, and that's something to look out for. I'd prefer that it wasn't, that they didn't do that and just left them in the natural state, because it kind of disguises what you're buying really, and it's difficult to pick a good one when they've had that done to them. So yeah, I think we're about I think we're about there. So I'm not entirely happy with the way that's summed up, but I suppose the 110 is a winner. The 110 is a winner, but you can't get a blade for it. The 110A, again, is a good plane, but you can't get a blade for it. That's just a variant of that. The 110, well, this is a 120, isn't it, with the beaver tail on? That's a definite no. This so-called dual purpose plane, that's a definite no. An old 220 is alright. I think that's a more modern one in between. Modern is probably a better buy, but they're both the same thing. They're okay. Again, you can't get the blades for them unless you're second market. I think the winner has to be the one with the flip cap on 220A that's got all the adjusters on, and you can put a new blade in. You can't go wrong with that one. Stanley 9.5 with a lever cap on, and effectively, I think these were called Stanley 18s and 19s. I think but they're basically a 9.5 with a knuckle cap on. I just wouldn't entertain buying one of those. I just, other than looks, they look pretty cool, but they really are. They don't make good users. So let me just check down my list to see if I've mentioned everything. I've got a bit of a bullet point list here. I think that about covers it. It's been a long one, but there's a lot to cover. And as I said, block planes are there's far more block planes than there are smoothing planes in variants and types and blades and one thing and another. It's a minefield, frankly. And I hope that's helped somebody. It's been absolutely mind-boggling for me to try and work it all out and get the different planes, try them, and other ones I've had, other ones I've got. It's been a real headache, frankly. But I hope that throws some light onto a very complicated subject. Thanks for watching and take care.